The NBA's return to play plans seem to be moving along great until recent concerns brought up by players about entering the Orlando bubble. I'm Sierra Goodwill, here with Mike Petraglia and Josue Pavon. Apparently, several, if not hundreds of players have now expressed concerns about the plan of isolating down in Orlando's Disney World for the NBA's return because of concerns over isolating away from their families, the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic, and the social unrest in our nation right now due to the fight against racial injustice. Guys, are you at all worried about how this will impact the start of the season?
I am. I just think that, guys, you're talking about two things here, really, to me, primarily, and you touched on a couple of them, Sierra. The optics with the social injustice demonstrations going on around the country, and the idea of putting these players in a bubble for 3 months. That's a lot longer than I think the players thought when they went into this process a couple of weeks ago. I think a lot of them thought, hey, we'll go down there, we'll loosen up for a couple of weeks, then we'll start playing games. And, some players will be out of there in a month. Some players who advance, into the deeper into the playoffs and towards the NBA finals, maybe you're talking about 8 weeks, but 3.5 to maybe even 4 months of isolation, that's too much. That's not going to work. It's been my concern really across all sports, especially baseball. If you expect these players to self-isolate with COVID getting better and better, and a lot of communities around the country coming out of this, and you expect them to be in a bubble, that is not going to work.
Yeah, I agree with that, Trags. There's going to be concern. We all knew that going into this, but I just think when it boils down to the majority and what the players are going to go there for, a chance to compete and to win a title, I think that overpowers everything. I just don't think there's enough voices from the NBA players that could change things. I know there are a lot of teams that may have been looking at this as like, we're probably going to play for a week and not even get a chance to make the playoffs. That speaks volumes. I think that makes sense for a lot of those clubs. But for the teams that have a shot and for the players that are, in a rotation, I just don't see an opportunity for those voices to be heard and for things to change the way the format is right now with the NBA. Now, in terms of the, what's going on right now, I mean, I'm not going to lie. The fact that it is in Florida and a state that slides way to the right, they also have a history of mass shootings and unfortunate events that have occurred in the last 15 years in Florida. I mean, Kyrie Irving and what he's saying right now, I can see some concern there. Everyone all gathered at once. This is, of course, a predominantly black league. And, with all that being said and thinking of something like that happening would be, so terrible and so awful. But, of course, it is something that is going to be on some players' minds that have to eventually come home and return to their families.
Yeah, I definitely think that NBA Commissioner Adam Silver has a history of listening to his players, so it's fair to now think that he might be listening to his players' concerns, especially when a lot of them are at the forefront of the current protests happening nationwide. We know Jaylen Brown drove 15 hours to Atlanta, and so I understand how players can now think, okay, let's just go walk away from this cause for 3.5 months to entertain people when they feel like there's probably something a little bit more bigger than basketball that they should be involved with. And I always think about Karl-Anthony Towns, who lost his mother to COVID-19. So he probably has a very different perspective than a lot of other NBA players and maybe a lot more concern about isolating from a grieving family for 3.5 months. So I definitely think it's valid to be concerned now about the NBA's return when everything seemed to be progressing at a really good pace compared to other leagues. But there's also the option for players to opt out. Do you think that it's the right call, even though it will come with, some salary cuts and all of that? But if players don't feel comfortable, the NBA is giving the option to opt out. Is that enough?
I think so. I mean, I think, you bring up Karl-Anthony Towns. That's a great example, Sierra. Look, I don't think any team would hold a single player accountable if they're not comfortable returning to this environment. No way. I mean, first of all, whoever wins the NBA title or any of the titles in any of these sports that return under COVID-19, you're going to have an asterisk by it. These are not normal times.
Come on, Flags. What are
player,
the Celtics
if a player doesn't feel comfortable returning, then they should not return. And I would have no problem with that. And, obviously, the way I feel about this is much different than a lot of other people feel with regard to COVID. I have said from the beginning that these leagues should not return until you allow fans back, simply because I think the logistics are going to be too complicated for a lot of these teams to pull off and still comply with some of these very strict COVID regulations.
Yeah, that's a good point, Trags. I mean, look, listen, I'm not saying if, I don't know, all-star players, caliber players, if they're scared to go, does that make them, a player that doesn't want to win more than the other superstars? No, not at all. Like, I completely respect that decision. If LeBron James himself said, you know what, I don't want to go, I changed my mind, I'm not going to fault him in saying that he's less of a leader or less of a winner. I get it, but I just don't think that's where the majority of these all-star players, their heads are at right now. And I shouldn't just say all-star players. I'm talking about guys that are in the rotation again. Like, like I said earlier, guys who have a chance to compete. I mean, I just think if you were to grab the players that are really concerned about this and not willing to go, I would guess a lot of them are probably on teams or probably in situations where they may not play a whole lot or they may not be able to compete a whole lot. Maybe I'm wrong. I could be wrong about that. But again, I just want to let it be known that if a superstar player were to speak up, that would change the conversation immensely. Now, is there a player that feels strongly enough to do so? I mean, that's a tough spot to be in, because then you would literally put a hold on this whole thing because you voice your opinion and because you're saying, I'm uncomfortable, and that could go for someone like James Harden or, any other player. I think that would be a very, very strong voice, and it would make a humongous difference for sure.
Well, we'll keep you updated on this developing NBA situation on our website at clnsmedia.com. And as always, on our YouTube channel at CLNS Media and all of our Celtics coverage on Celtics All Access.